Welcome to Academic Views of Technology, where we now combine together technological determinism and the social construction of technology. So before rushing off to new content, I wanted to go back and let's take actually a step to analyze something that you may have to do as action activity, where we're going to take a more recent kind of news article and look for some aspects that are in it that seem to align with technological determinism versus when we also look at the actual SCOT or social construction of technology kind of perspective. So this isn't a super long video, but it just meant as this first kind of engagement of applying, like taking what we see in our everyday world around us and applying some of what we've just been learning. So in the previous video, we just looked at the social construction of technology, which is from that far spectrum is looking directly at the social groups that play a role as part of this. And before that, we've looked at the technological deterministic view, is that the technology is having that bigger kind of changing force within society. So now let's take a look at an article and see what TD and SCOT views we can see in it. So before jumping into that, just let's go through a quick little review of technological determinism and then SCOT. So remember that technological determinism is a theory that society's technology determines its cultural values, social structure, and history. According to the theory, social progress follows an inevitable course that is driven by technological innovation. It presumes that society's technology drives the development of its social structure and cultural values. We had examples like Marshall McLuhan, who talked about the medium as the message, that the means of communication itself creates an impact regardless of what is being said. For example, as the eye becomes the principal organ for taking in information, linear patterns and repeatable forms began to dominate our thinking behavior. And communication was again changed the way that we perceive ourselves and see the world, as we have these new internet and digital worlds that we're seeing as tools. And so as we shape our tools, he said, and then our tools shape us. So again, we're developing these tools, we have this kind of technology we're building, but then the after effects of that is that it starts shaping the rest of our actual culture and society. And technology, according to McLuhan, is an extension of our own natural faculties. Another example I brought up was the idea of going closer with the cultural values, and Thorsten Veblen presented, and the idea of conspicuous consumption, that even these technologies and luxury goods start being used as a status of where we are within society itself. TD is again that technology drives our social structure and cultural changes, almost to the point of technological autonomy, is like the clear progression away from direct, immediate control made it possible for human beings, even in primitive times, to slide forward and into extrapolation and to picture devices still less controllable, still more independent than anything of which they had direct experiences. And also that technological imperative view is that the concept that new technologies are inevitable and essential, and that they must be developed and accepted for the good of society. And progress is inevitable, technology is progress. All these things are all part of that kind of what aligns with somewhat of a technological deterministic kind of standpoint. But still be arguing is a lot of those are also within what could be considered the hard technological determinism. So for here versus the actual far radical kind of social constructivism. And you get the idea then of soft technological determinism in between, is that technology is still having an impact on us, but then it's more that it opens up this dialogue for new things to come in and new groups to play a role to have these dialogues around this. And so when you're looking at technological determinism, you're looking for, well, where has it been ingrained into us? We'll see that. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, if we go like full social construction of technology, or SCOT, is that it centers around the social groups that are in relation to an artifact. So the key thing when looking at anything from a social constructivist kind of point is the groups that are part of it. And in this case, social groups are defined in this theory in terms of a shared meaning. Members of a group attach the same meaning to a particular technology. So it's not just based on like ethnic backgrounds, genetic, whatever. This is more of like any groups that with a specific artifact, what meanings do they associate with it? And the common people then form groups within that, and these different groups that then interact around the same artifact. So relevant social groups are generally heterogeneous, so including both technical professionals and consumers and new groups and emerging and changing over time. So the technical developers and creators to the consumers who are buying it to the general everyday use, whatever is a wide range, and these evolve and change over time. And central to the idea of SCOT is again, the relevant social groups. So who are the most influential social groups that could be interested in an innovation? The interpretive flexibility, how do their relevant social groups ascribe meaning to an innovation? Controversies that are associated around that, proposed strategies for resolving a controversy may be involved with this, and potentially reaching a point of closure or stability where there becomes a little bit more of consensus among the groups, but that doesn't mean it just stays there. This develops and grows over time. And again, when we're analyzing stuff from a SCOT perspective, is like, look at the particular artifact. Be cautious of any more panic. Like, look at similar innovations that are right around it, but look at the artifact first. Identify the relevant social groups. So who has the power and why? Economics, politics, any vehement debate taking place among the relevant social groups, the group that it may gain or lose. How do these groups interpret the actual text? So what is their technological framework or like their worldview? How they define and evaluate it? Was their technological, like, what is their interpretive flexibility in relation to it? And has society's understanding of the text stabilized? So is there a closure of what people accept around it, or is this still within controversy at this time, or what's the key tenets of what we're looking at? And so even though this is a quicker video, I want, like, you should be going back to those technological deterministic notes and the social construction technology notes to make sure you're understanding it. But I want to take this and actually apply it. Like, if we look at an actual article that's in relation to, in this case, I'm doing direct technology, but say information technology with cell phones and metadata and everything else like that. Like, if we take a look at to see how have both of these viewpoints played a role in what's happening in society. First thing of how is technology affecting society and how is society affecting technology in these changes, and saying that where I argue more coming from a centralist perspective on this, of that soft technological determinism and soft social construction, is that it is both kind of thing, is that technology has affected us to a point that we become dependent upon it, but then we also have cases where new groups come into play where it opens up and their interpretation around it and use of it, and vice versa. All these different groups has an effect overall. And going with an extreme case here of a real world example to remember that this is happening. Right now I picked this more relevant to when I recorded this video. So I recorded this video February 13th, 2022, and this article, it came out February 8th, 2022, and also the events are just within the last 2 years of what's going on. So talking about Myanmar's fight for democracy is now scrap over phone records, and what does that actually mean? And the fact that that's even a new thing of phone being electronic communication, but now phone records being digital but metadata and information technology, and the impact that's having on real world everyday things. And so I'm going to be doing a quick run through of this article just to kind of point out some of what seems to me to be like that aligns with the technological deterministic, and then also what aligns with the SCOT perspective of looking at this actual scenario. And you're going to be applying this in a future activity or test or anything else yourself as well. So before going through and doing the article, which I will have a text-to-speech of the actual article, and I've got it posted so you can read it as well, I want to give some context of, like, first, Myanmar, like, where is it in the actual world, and being aware this is around Thailand, China, Bangladesh, and India. And it's a country in Southeast Asia, going too far ahead, Southeast Asia and largest mainland. And like the stats I quickly found from right here, and this is more Wikipedia quickly found, is saying that you're getting a population of roughly 54 million people as of 2017. Now, in 2020 and 2021, some major things happened in the actual country that are still embroiled. And so this is the 2020 elections, the 2021 military coup d'etat. So in Myanmar's 2020 parliamentary election, the ostensibly ruling National League for Democracy, the NDL, the party of state councillor, right here, competed with various other smaller parties, particularly the military-affiliated Union Solidarity and Development Party, so USDP, and other parties and individuals allied with specific ethnic minorities also ran for office. So there's a wide range of parties that were involved in this. But the NLD won the 2020 minority general election on November 8th of 2020 in a landslide. Again, this is all COVID-y times. and like winning super majority in both House, so winning 300 and 396 out of 476 elected seats in Parliament. The USDP, so it's the military-backed party, regarded as a proxy military, suffered a humiliating defeat. As the election results began emerging, the USDP rejected them, urging a new election with the military as observers. And the military argued that it had found over 8 million irregularities in voter lists in over 300 townships, called on the Myanmar Union Election Commission, UEC, and government to review the results, but the commission dismissed the claims for lack of any evidence. So it's the beginning states, embroiled political power and military power. In 2021, and being again February 1st, 2021, this is only roughly a year ago from the time of recording this video, is in the early morning of the February 1st, 2021, the day to Parliament was set to convene. The Tatmadaw, probably completely pronouncing that wrong, Myanmar's military detained state councillor Aung San Suu Kyi. I'm also attempted to pronounce that, but I know I got that wrong, so I apologize. And other members of the ruling party. The military handed power to military chief and declared a state of emergency for 1 year and began closing the borders, restricting travel and electronic communication nationwide. And we're seeing that first thing of there's military in the groups and party here. We can see where those parties are impacting of this, but we're leading up to looking at one specific thing of how phones and phone records can be so important. But you can also see the technological deterministic thing coming out of this is that starting at the electronic communications nationwide is the fact that communication, electronic communication being such an important technology that's driving values and social structure, the military taking this as a way to dominate and control the rest of society through that actual technology. And that technology has been shaping our society. So there's one step into that kind of technological deterministic thing that's part of it, but still with these social groups of the political power and military parties that are playing a role. So by the second day of the coup, thousands of protesters were marching in the streets of the nation's largest city and commercial capital, Yangon, and other protests erupted nationwide, largely halting commerce and transportation. And despite the military's arrests and killing of protesters, the first weeks of the coup found growing public participation, including groups of civil servants, teachers, students, workers, monks, and religious leaders. And so this is something that's embroiled, and this is big that's going on at this time in the actual country of the military coup, but the dominance for power between groups and centering part of it around control of communication as part of the actual power. And so this article now is going into Myanmar's fight for democracy is now scraped for phone records. And what does that actually mean? And so when I'm going to run this text-to-speech, while I'm going through it, I want you to listen for and see, do you pick up parts where a technology has been so ingrained within the actual society, it's become, it starts ingraining itself into value cultures that are right here and are affecting things. But then we can also look from the social construction of technology viewpoint, where we look for the relevant groups around these artifacts of phones and metadata from cell phone calls and what they attest to around this in these controversies. And this again is an extreme case. So I am going to step out of the presentation, and I've got the usual text-to-speech right here. You can read through the article yourself if you want first, or you can just listen to it right now. So just give me a second. I will pause my microphone and then start playing the actual text.
For democracy is now a scrap over phone records. Norwegian telecoms giant Telenor wants to leave Myanmar. Activists say its exit risks putting their data and their freedom at risk. Telenor. 3. Photograph. Brent Lewin, Bloomberg Getty Images. In Myanmar, the phone records of pro-democracy activists connect them together like suspects on a corkboard. When many of those activists fled the military crackdown and went into hiding after the coup in February 2021, they believed the trails of phone calls, mapping out their association with family members and colleagues, were safe on networks outside the military's control. Now they claim that data is in peril. Like all telecoms companies, Myanmar's 4 major operators keep a record of phone call metadata information about who calls who, when, and for how long. Pro-democracy campaigner Kyo did not worry much about his metadata even when the coup shocked the country. The activist, who asked for his real name not to be published because he is afraid of being arrested by the military, believed his personal data was safe because he was using a SIM card made by Telenor, a multinational headquartered in Norway, a country he associated with democracy and human rights. But in July that sense of security was shattered when Telenor, the country's second-largest telecoms business, announced it would leave Myanmar, selling 100% of the company to ME, a Lebanese investment group. For the following 7 months, the company has been trying to escape Myanmar's deteriorating security situation and military pressure to install surveillance equipment in its networks. But as Telenor joins other international companies rushing for the exit, the news of its departure prompted panic among human rights activists like Cure, who are worried their data could end up in the hands of the military as a result of the sale. Activists have been scrambling to stop this from happening. More than 470 civil society groups from Myanmar filed a complaint against Telenor's sale in July. That same month, Cure wrote a letter asking the company to delete his personal data request he believed Telenor would have to comply with because Norway complies with Europe's GDPR privacy law. But Telenor's reply, seen by Wired, said the GDPR does not in general apply to Telenor Myanmar, frustrating Cure. We are paying them, just like the people in the EU are paying, but the treatment is very different, he says. The worry is that if the regime gets control of this data, they will be able to root out the networks, says Joseph Wildramsing, senior researcher at SCOT, a Dutch group that investigates the ethics of multinationals and is helping Cure with his case. If they get one person and they find out the number, then they can see who that number has been in contact with, and they can track down the family members and the network contacts and the other activists and use that information to target people. This week, Cure is trying a new approach. On February 8, he filed a legal complaint in which his real name is redacted, arguing that Telenor's Myanmar business is subject to GDPR as a subsidiary of a Norwegian company. The complaint, filed with the Norwegian Data Protection Authority, highlights how the telecoms giant has become trapped between wanting to leave Myanmar as quickly as possible and its responsibility to the users who believe the military could use its data to track them down. We understand Telenor wants to leave, says Ketil Salagramberg, a partner at Sands law firm in Oslo who is working on the case. Our concern is they are leaving the country without safeguarding the data of the 18 to 19 million customers. Ramberg says the complaint is an attempt to inspire the Norwegian Data Authority to intervene and to prove the Norwegian headquartered group has control over the data processing in Myanmar, a claim Telenor denies. None of the data is handled in Norway or the EU, and GDPR does not apply to Telenor Myanmar's customer data handling, says Telenor spokesperson David Fageland. The concerning situation in Myanmar has developed in a direction where we are currently in a conflict between local laws on the one hand and our values, international law and human rights principles on the other, says Fageland, adding that this made it impossible for the company to stay in Myanmar. Fageland confirmed to Wired that the phone call metadata will be transferred as part of the sales process to allow continued operations and avoid disruption of services. For customers, short, at least they try to sometimes push back or insist on due process, says Ramanjit Singh Kinma, Asia Policy Director at digital rights group Access Now. Milliliters is regarded as being actively keen to facilitate government surveillance wherever possible in order to ensure market access. Milliliters Group did not reply to a request to comment, but has in the past described concerns about its ethics as racist and discriminatory. But Telenor's Fageland says the company chose to do business with Milliliters because it found no direct relationships between Milliliters and the military. Local activists disagreed with that assessment. That is not true, says Waipio, a digital rights activist now working for Access Now, who left Myanmar 2 months ago but did not want to share her current location for fear of military reprisals. M1 already has investment in the tower companies which are linked to Mittal, a company which is majority owned by the military. Fageland, however, describes this as an indirect relationship. Mittal did not respond to a request for comment. See what's next in tech with the Fast Forward. 1 year on from Myanmar's deadly coup, the military junta continues to be associated with violence against their opponents. Nearly 12,000 people have been arbitrarily detained for voicing opposition to the military, the United Nations said in January, adding that at least 290 have died in detention, likely due to the use of torture. Cure is well aware of the risks. If this is transferred to the junta, we will be arrested, tortured and killed, he says. He is especially worried the military will use his phone records to track down and arrest his family members to force him out of hiding. Local news reports suggest there have been cases where family members, including children, have been detained to force their parents to give themselves up. Activists hoped the violence would incentivize Telenor, in which the Norwegian government owns a 53.97% share, to stay and act as a buffer between the military regime and its customers' communications data. But for a more sympathetic audience at home, it justifies the company's attempts to get out. Telenor's senior executives have been banned from leaving the country and the company has repeatedly raised concerns about its employees' safety. They have more than 700 employees there, says Frank McLullan, telecoms expert at DNB Markets, a Norwegian investment bank. It's very important to be realistic about what the alternative is when soldiers with weapons are running up your stairs in another country and your management is not even allowed to leave the country. Access Now's Chime believes this argument is being used by Telenor as an excuse to dodge full transparency. We understand concerns about staff safety are legitimate, but we actually think this is being used to suppress information for business reasons and for public relations reasons, he says. When Telenor started operating in Myanmar in 2014, the country had just liberalized its telecom sector and was undergoing a transition away from full military rule. Many democracy activists and human rights defenders signed up as customers because Telenor came in with this reputation of being very ethical, says Samos Wild-Ramsing, who is helping Cure with his case. Part of their sales pitch was, "Look, we're Norwegians, you can trust us." Telenor has earned accolades for its efforts to be transparent about the shutdown orders it has received in Myanmar, and in the immediate aftermath of the 2021 coup it lived up to that reputation. When it was forced by the military to shut down the internet or block calls, the company disclosed those orders on its website. But on February 14, 2021, those updates stopped. It is currently not possible for Telenor to disclose the directives we received from the authorities, the company said at the time. That was just the start. Before the coup, Telenor had reported being under pressure to install surveillance technology into its networks. After the military takeover, that pressure only intensified. The regime set deadlines for its installation and published a draft cybersecurity bill that would force internet providers to store the personal data of users for 3 years and hand it over to the military on request. The intercept technology would give the authorities direct access to internet service provider systems without case-by-case approval, according to a December 2020 statement made by Telenor, which has since been removed from its website. Although democratic countries also use this technology to help law enforcement investigate crime, Telenor said at the time the legal safeguards to prevent this technology's misuse did not exist in Myanmar. Fageland says Telenor would not enable the intercept equipment in its networks voluntarily, although he declined to comment on whether the technology was already installed due to well-founded concerns for the safety of our employees. It didn't take long for the coup to start weighing on the business. In results published in May, Telenor wrote off the entire $783 million value of its Myanmar operation, dragging the rest of the company to an overall loss of 3.9 billion Norwegian crowns. When Telenor announced it would sell to M1, rumors circulated that the military regime also wanted a local partner involved in the deal. Then in January, local news reported that the junta had approved the sale to a partnership of Milliliters Group and Investcom Myanmar, a company owned by petrol conglomerate SHWE Bienfu. Neither Telenor, Mi Group nor SHWE Bienfu have confirmed the involvement of the petrol conglomerate in the deal. Despite this, activists saw the news as confirmation of their worst fears. SHWE Bienfu is a gems trader with deep links to the Myanmar military and no apparent experience operating or telecommunications business, says Dan Amorn, a spokesperson at campaign group Justice for Myanmar, pointing to how SHWE Bienfu's chairman, Thane Windsor, is a director of another company, Mahayama Public Company, which has a stake in military-owned Mittel. If the sale goes through, it will be the military in control of Telenor Myanmar and its data. SHWE Bienfu spokesperson, Kyo Myung, says the group is not privy to the details of the Telenor sale but describes allegations that the group is linked to the military as baseless. "We do not do business with the military and our group chairman, Thane Windsor, has already resigned from the board of directors of Mahayama plc, which owns just 1% of Mittel," says Kyo Myung. It is not only activists who are facing an uncertain future. Telenor employees are too. One staff member, who asks to remain anonymous because he is concerned for his safety, says he will consider leaving the company if the news about Telenor selling to SHWE Bienfu is true. "I don't want to work for a military regime, a related company, or a related person," he says. "I'm strongly against the military takeover. I don't want to give my professional knowledge or my efforts to any of them." More Great Whites.
So there, you get one feel there now of, like, what's going on. And this is more of a developing thing. So this isn't a case where we're really hitting closure at all, but more modern day. So again, what we're looking at here is, again, democracy, military, and but the issue now of phone records and metadata and what that actually has an impact on, say, ingraining it into actual social structure and power dynamics and what is actually happening with these groups. So again, the Myanmar's fight for democracy is now a scrap over phones. And from here, and the key thing is, again, that the phone records of pro-democracy activists connected them together like suspects on a corkboard. When many of those activists fled the military crackdown, went to hiding after the coup in February 2021, they believed that the trails of phone calls mapping out their associations with family members and colleagues were safe on networks outside the military's control. And now they claim that data is in peril. So even in this one statement, you're seeing here one of how ingrained, you have social groups that are within here, but they're tied together and needing this actual telecommunication technology to connect to each other and to actually organize. But on top of that is the information technology of that data that is actually being kept of all these calls, that metadata, and what effect that has on structures, and that actual fear that even just this data can control people's lives that are coming out of this afterwards. And like all telecommunication companies, Myanmar has 4 major operators kept a record of phone calls. So this is the metadata, so information about who calls who, when, and for how long. And pro-democracy campaigners didn't realize it's been having the issue that they thought that this was actually safe, that this data and what's associated with the actual companies was safe, and what this meant and why they were choosing certain companies from here and what's associated along those lines. But right now, with that issues of military growth, military sale, we're seeing that this expand beyond a point. So this is just one article. It's a real world thing. Again, I'm not bringing it for any other, just something that's more high impact and is happening more recently, and technology playing a role in that, and how we can view it from 2 sides. And so one is, taking a TD perspective is that you want to focus on the technology and the effects of its driving change within there. What cultural values, what desires, who's dependent upon it for stuff right here, and how that technology is driving these actual changes and affecting it. So again, from here, it's an important role. For me, this is my quick analysis of it, and I don't want to make a super long video about this. But you can see from here is that looking at this is the important role of cell phones have played on connecting, organizing, and communication upon large groups of actual people. So that technology, even just communication, how we send it, but cell phones in general, what role they actually play to access of information and connection and coordination amongst large masses of actual people from right here. And seeing that from one side has become such an important thing that pro-democracy kind of activist groups using this as a way to communicate, and this becoming central importance from it, to also then military groups seeing this as a way to control these dissenting actual groups, and the importance of electronic communication within our cultural values in society. A for freedom or B for control, what side you're actually on that. But the important role that technology has brought this forwards, even the fact of that information technology being the metadata that is just even collected, which is just data, that's just that information technology, storage, retrieval, doing stuff within it, but that is playing a role on these groups, for the activist groups. The fact that just these call logs were kept by a telecommunication company and now could be accessed by the actual military group, that this information could be used to hunt them down, to control and have power over other people. And how from this TD kind of perspective of that technology is having a major driving force within here of the technology used to communicate, and the information that then is kept while communications are being done, used by different groups. And in this case, what I would say is a very negative experience from here, from these military side, and what this means when you're even using that technology. The idea of surveillance technology, and then the importance of this electronics, and how that has then shifted how we think and how we do our work. Call metadata, even the idea of metadata, these collections where the data seems like it's not a lot of just knowing when, where, and how long, but the back through that you can get these social webs that you can then start analyzing and getting more data out of, and how important that metadata has been, if in this case by military groups, but also used by companies like Facebook, Meta, and the rest, that are used for marketing and collecting of information about people. And the age that we're in now, that this technology is having such an effect on us that is driving our cultural choices. So even when it comes to views of countries countries, like it was mentioned in the article of Norway being this pro-democracy actual group, and that's why they wanted to use the technology coming from there that's actually associated with it. And this is an importance of this technology from here. Even partially being not knowing about that metadata being important, but now realizing how important that is, and that one group that's more dominant, the military, realizing this and trying to dominate electronic communication as a way to dominate the actual people themselves. And so again, the importance of information technology, call data for surveillance of people, who owns the rights to that actual data, and that this is having a direct effect on people. And this is that TD perspective. I'm not saying I would say this full hard technological deterministic standpoint, but more from the soft technological determinist standpoint, that this is shaping the culture and society and what's actually being done. And this is different from back in the day before pre-communication. Still communication being important, but the fact of this electronic communication, how the control is being done, and the importance that is then placed on to information technology like metadata. And what do we get from there? Now, jumping to the other side from here of then looking at this article from a SCOT perspective, first you want to see, well, what are the artifacts that are important? Next, focus on identifying the different social groups that are in relation to that artifact. So again, social groups are defined in the theory as terms of shared meaning or membership to make these different groups. What is the interpretive flexibility of each group, and what are controversies that are around there, and has it actually stabilized around the technology? And this is more around the design, but with this article, we are hitting a case where it's more definitely in controversy. It's a wide controversy of that freedom of stuff. I would argue that the artifacts specifically talked about in this article that are playing a role are cell phones. Cell phones being a form of like having access to the internet and communication for all the rest of this, and call metadata as an information technology that we're working with. The social groups that are related around this then are looking at that pro-democracy activists that we have, the telecommunication company like Telenor and other companies from right here, and the Myanmar military from the coup from the USDP actual party. And so when you're looking at these, is that there's more groups that are involved. You can start breaking these down, but these are the general groups in relation to cell phone data and what this means. And if we're then looking at the interpretive flexibility of how this is done, is that this pro-democracy activist is that access to the cell phones and access to companies that are not controlled by the actual military are really important to them, and that access to that, and then their metadata, this is their safety of their lives and their family and what they want for a country in the actual future from right here. The telecommunication company is trying to offer this freedom in this network, but seeing themselves as being this Norwegian company and pulling out, not wanting to deal with the military actual case of what they're dealing with and how they view the companies, while trying to help the people, but not wanting to, as a company, deal with that and being international borders. And the minor military looking at cell phones and call data as a way of controlling a population, of taking the coup that they believe from their side is the strongest, and they need to dominate the actual people or control this, and you can control these massive people through the communication and surveillance of the communication, and having access to metadata to then be able to surveil different people, and then people knowing that they're being surveilled. What does this mean? And so there's a wide range of what this means around for these different groups, because even just different communication companies, like they mentioned Telenor and that in Lebanese investment group of M1 and other companies, of who were they actually associated with, like Telenor being Norwegian and associated with the Norwegian government and others, versus political cases of like other telecommunication companies that are more associated with the military and more freely willing to participate with this kind of control, and the power that's going back between both. So these interpretive flexibility around the technology becomes different from the social aspect of this is not just a cell phone for communication and a metadata just for keeping analysis of charging bills or cost. This is then from one group is their livelihood and their activity and what should be done, and arguing for digital control and freedom, and having that dialogue of on this solved. Like from the companies they choose, they look at what freedoms are being offered because they know the importance of the cell phone, and it's not just this communication, but it's their safety and control of different groups. And the military group trying to dominate, get access to information and control communication as a way to control the actual country and military in this, and communication companies from right here. And so there's a lot of controversies around here, and this is a different side for analyzing it. And what I hope by looking at this article, and when you say looking for what I say for that centralist kind of view, from just looking centralist, I mean the sense of technological determinism in SCOT, is that technology is shaping our society and where we are. You're seeing that in this direct case in Myanmar. There's way more than just a cell phone being part of this, but it's one role that's playing in here, that part of this has been so ingrained into our cultures of what does this communication and having access to the communication networks networks is really important, and the laws that are associated around them, the groups that want that to be controlled, to the fact that the metadata and the information technology that's collected around that source is also really important from right here. And so these two things of physical electronic communication of phones, the internet and networks themselves, to information technology like metadata is also like hugely important and having an effect with cultural values within an actual society. And then coming from the SCOT perspective of analyzing this, of seeing these different groups around the actual artifacts and who's trying to dominate and control this. And this is what I'm not saying, it's never an innovation to say what's best, but these groups that are controlling this. Like if it's the pro-military groups, they want to go for that domination control of power. And so what they see is right as a solution to stuff is this surveillance technology and having access to surveil the actual population as part of what backs up their beliefs, versus the different pro-democracy or other groups that can be considered on the different side of this that are then saying, well, no, this data and stuff is important to us for our safety and our way to communicate and control, like communicate amongst other groups and organize as these activist kind of actual moments from right here. And so it's the same artifact but viewed by different ones, and like the communication that will happen or power dynamics will play a role of how will this shift and change in the future. And even when it comes into telecommunication companies that are part of this, of how is this actually designed, because it's not what they originally came there for as just a business, but now what it is that's being influenced by other military, political, and other groups. And then where could this evolve and change from now? Like what does metadata come from here if one group that's pro-activist is able to get backed up enough that there's laws and other things put into place to protect metadata beyond just what a company has? Because here's a case where a company's selling it off, and so one trust in a company then you thought you had is lost when that company sells it and then also sells that data. And why is that data so important to that sale? Like that says a bigger thing of why is the data so important to this. And so I don't want to talk forever. That's already 36 minutes into this, but I want you to think about that when you go back to the article and you look at that technological determinism of like the impact that these have, that it's so ingrained that this technology is having an effect on society and changing us from right here, and the importance of these things, to then also the SCOT perspective of looking at it from the other side and seeing not from a full radical SCOT perspective, which means only the social groups are involved and technology is just something that comes out of it, but saying this in between, that both are kind of affecting each other, that the metadata and cell phones and the importance of this is brought to this open case of where we're at. And so just like we made our tools and they're shaping us, but then these groups that are still now evolving out of this, especially in this highly political environment, like with Myanmar, what will this mean after this? And like, just because it's happening in Myanmar doesn't mean that's not also happening for us. If we look at our own community within here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, of what does it mean for the networks that we have and have access to, and how is that being controlled, and who are the voices for, say, even digital activism along those lines. Okay, so I hope that gave you a little bit of practice. We will have more discussions about this. If nothing else, I hope at this time of year you're all still doing good and moving forwards, and maybe reaching out to other people to see how they're doing, because this crazy world we're in right now. Other than that, I hope you continue to try to have a good day, and remember that you are all awesome people. If you disagree with me, then I disagree with you. I am correct. You are awesome, and continue to have a good day.